is 1955. The place, Scribner's Bookstore, 597 Fifth Avenue. A young up-and-coming producer named James B. Harris has just bought a hardback copy of the new novel from crime writer Lionel White, Clean Break. He's just read a cracking review of it in the New York Post, and the racetrack robbery plot and interlocking flashback structure excite him greatly. Clutching the book in his hot little hand, he can't wait to show it to his new business partner, Stanley Kubrick. The two of them met only the year previous, and while he hadn't enjoyed Kubrick's first picture, Fear and Desire, he'd been impressed that it got out to the public on such a low budget. This past summer, upon seeing the refinements and budding potential in Kubrick's second picture, Killer's Kiss, he knew he'd found an opportunity to capitalize on a massive emerging talent. Together the two of them formed a new company, the bright shining star of the Harris-Kubrick Corporation, and now Harris is determined to secure them both a career in the film industry if it kills them. The only thing he isn't sure about is, he's confident in the kid's visual sense, but less so in his ability to structure a story. That's why Clean Break interests him so much. Based on the things he and Kubrick want to pop out, this novel seems like just the right combination of gritty, intelligent, and above all, popular. This is what Stanley needs, Harris says as he thanks the doll at the counter and takes the book home. Something that's got the story all worked out. Kubrick would agree with Harris's assessment, and eventually the two would end up with the rights to film the novel. First as Day of Violence, then as Bed of Fear, and finally as The Killing. After a comedy of errors regarding the license at United Artists, Frank Sinatra was involved, don't ask, they brought on obscure crime novelist Jim Thompson to help them write the screenplay, and just barely managed to secure minor Hollywood star, and future Dr. Strangelove actor, Sterling Hayden to be their leading man. United Artists weren't terribly impressed, but all the same still granted them $200,000 in funding. With some extra money chipped in from Harris and his father, they came out with a final budget of $330,000. Still a tight figure in movie terms, but with careful planning, they could certainly make it work. And boy did they ever! Knowing this was the potential tipping point of his career, Kubrick ran the tightest of tight ships on the production, finishing the shoot in exactly the 24 days they'd been assigned, despite having major clashes with cinematographer Lucien Ballard.
He said to Lucien, "What are you doing, Lucien? I put the camera here, you're pulling it way back." He said, "Well, I haven't changed anything. I'm using a 50mm lens to give you precisely the same coverage. That particular piece of information, of course, is dead wrong. The perspective changes. It's a different shot." And Stanley said, "Put the camera where I told you, with the lens that I asked for, or get off the set and don't come back."
Everything was so meticulously planned out and executed from start to finish that the film barely needed extra work in post-production. To editor Betty Steinberg, all Kubrick had to say was where he wanted which shots to go, and then he would leave her to work while he spent the rest of the day tossing a football around. It's understandable that Kubrick would want to get his kicks in where he could, because he and his wife Ruth were both miserable in LA, which did not help their increasingly rocky marriage. That their relationship was crumbling isn't surprising, given some of Kubrick's attitudes towards women, both real and fictional. Actress Adrienne Corey, who played Mrs. Alexander in A Clockwork Orange, would later say of him, "I don't think he can talk to women. I think you fall into various categories. You're a wife and mother, you have great tits, very few of them have brains." And given what happens to Mrs. Alexander in A Clockwork Orange, yeah, let's just say we'll be getting more into Kubrick's attitudes on women as the series goes on. Which makes it all the more interesting to note that in The Killing, we have by far the most well-rounded and entertaining female character in Kubrick's entire filmography to date. Heck, probably even the best character we've seen, period. And she has some decent competition in this movie. But before we get into all that, we should probably go over the basic premise first. Like its source material, The Killing is about a criminal named Johnny Clay who's recently finished a prison sentence and is planning to pull one last big heist at the local racetrack before getting out for good and settling down with his girlfriend. Johnny's partners on the heist are Marvin, a bookkeeper, Randy, a crooked cop, George, a racetrack teller, and Mike, the track bartender. He also hires an old wrestler friend, Maurice, and a sharpshooter, Nicky, both of whom will not be in on the full plan and will not know any of the other men involved. The plan is designed to be foolproof, and for a while it seems to be, but Johnny ultimately underestimates exactly how foolish fools can be. For example, one shouldn't assume that no one who's in on the plan will blab about it, or that the person they blab to won't be their dangerously manipulative gold-digging wife. And that's where Sherry comes in. Sherry is George's wife, and let me tell you, I cannot get enough of this woman. The sass levels on her are just off the charts.
Tonight, I don't suppose there's anything for dinner.
Well, of course there is, darling. There are all sorts of things.
I don't smell nothing.
Well, that figures, because you're too far away from it.
Too far away from it?
Certainly you don't think I had it all cooked, do you? It's all down the shopping center. And the climax to this exciting story, the moral, the punchline, George. Why talk about it? Maybe it's all to the good in the long run. After all, if people didn't have headaches, what would happen to the aspirin industry?
I'm going to have it, Sherry. Hundreds of thousands, maybe 500,000.
Of course you are, darling. Did you put the right address on the envelope when you sent it to the North Pole?
Oh man. Sherry is smart, she's funny, devious, independent, she revels in keeping her husband under her thumb, and yet may actually have a smidgen of regret for her actions, and she's played with an absolutely perfect cold glee by actress Marie Windsor. This character, man, this character. She could have been a much simpler femme fatale or gold digger archetype. But with the blueprints from White's novel, the additional scenes and dialogue from Thompson, the life from Windsor's performance, and the enhancements from Kubrick's construction of the mise-en-scène, Sherry pops as this immensely watchable and interesting character. Really, all the characters in the film benefit from this combination of talent. Their dialogue all feels written, but it's well written, and the actors all deliver it with a level of conviction and engagement that's far above the amateur acting in Kubrick's previous films. These actors are almost all culled from a selection of Kubrick's personal favorite crime films, and their experience in the genre is apparent. They know their character types and are able to play to their strengths well. Johnny is the stoic, fast-talking mastermind with a soft spot for those close to him. George is the meek, nervous doormat whose bottled frustrations are on the verge of bursting out at any moment. Randy is cocky and a bit smarmy, Mike is rough around the edges, but he cares deeply about his wife. Nicky is unnaturally natural and good with animals despite his profession, and Maurice is a mellow guy whose philosophical musings you never really understand, but don't mind because he sounds basically like smooth Russian velvet.
You know, I often thought that the gangster and the artist are the same in the eyes of the masses. They are admired and hero-worshipped, but there is always present underlying wish to see them destroyed at the peak of their glory.
Oh yeah, didn't get a word of that, but whatever it was, I liked it. Anyway, going back to Sherry. Everyone in the film does well acting and writing-wise, but she's probably the best of the lot, in no small part because we linger in a lot of her scenes and get ample opportunity to watch her do her thing. Kubrick does a lot of long takes on this film, a technique that, like one-point perspective, is starting to become one of his trademarks. And several of those long takes are spent on scenes with Sherry and George. André Bazin, a film theorist you'll hear a lot about if you ever take a film class, always argued that one of film's strengths is its ability to capture reality in a way that imprecise paintings or still photographs can't. The longer you let the camera roll, the more of an unbroken piece of reality you get, enhanced all the more when a filmmaker takes care to create complex, layered compositions with a strong sense of space in depth. Bazin was a great fan of filmmakers like Orson Welles, who mastered this kind of shooting and composition in films like Citizen Kane. Surprise, surprise, Kubrick once cited Citizen Kane as one of his favorites as well. The compositions in The Killing aren't quite up to Welles' levels yet, but there's still plenty of Kubrick's usual ambition at play. In George and Sherry's scenes in particular, in addition to the takes being long, you'll also see a lot done with the idea of bars. Literal bars, bars of light and shadow, window blinds that look like bars, bars on a birdcage, bars everywhere. This is a common bit of visual flair used in a lot of expressionist and noir films, both because it looks cool, and because a lot of characters in those films are imprisoned, literally or metaphorically, by the law or by fate or what have you. So by constantly associating these bars with George and Sherry, you end up taking that idea of imprisonment and subconsciously applying it to their marriage. It's interesting to note that Sherry says she and George have been married for 5 years, the exact amount of time Johnny was in jail for. Marriage is a prison, eh, Stanley? The point I'm trying to make is that by lingering in these scenes without cutting, you get more time to sit and soak in the compositions, and take in details like the bar thing, or how a lamp behind Sherry's head looks like a demented queen's crown, or little touches of Asian decor in the apartment that give it a hint of exoticism. Minimizing cuts also enhances the realism of the performances, letting you see actors bounce off each other more naturally than in the usual shot-reverse shot style of most conversation scenes. And of course there's the budget factor at play as well. It's a lot easier and cheaper to shoot a full scene in just a few long takes rather than having to eat up time and film stock with additional coverage shots. If it saves money and creates a great artistic effect at the same time, there's no reason not to do it. And lastly, given that Kubrick's first short films were documentaries, it makes sense that he would carry forward a documentarian's urge to convey the real, both in the sense of creating a deeper film world and in the sense of bringing his own reality into that world. Most of the racetrack footage under the opening credits was shot on location by Alexander Singer, Kubrick's high school friend and second camera operator on Day of the Fight. Cola Quariani, who plays Maurice, was one of Kubrick's real-life chess buddies from New York and not a professional actor. The marriage as prison thing is debatable, but I'd say that counts as well. This kind of dedication to bringing one's particular vision of reality to the screen is a big part of what defines an auteur, and Stanley Kubrick fits that definition to a ruthless degree. Even when working with someone else's story, which he would continue to do for the rest of his career now that he'd gotten a taste for it, he was always insistent on creating a version of that story that was uniquely his own, informed by his particular sensibilities, his experiences, his philosophies. That's how we get Lionel White's Clean Break versus Stanley Kubrick's The Killing, or Stephen King's The Shining versus Kubrick's The Shining. Somehow, despite doing so many adaptations, his films from here on out will almost always either equal or exceed their source material in quality, and at the very least present a different enough take to qualify as a completely unique creative entity. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble at this point, and I feel like I've barely touched on everything in this film that I could possibly talk about. Like, hey look! Gerald Fried is on music duties again! Hey look! Kubrick got a sound effects editor! Hey look! Awesome tracking shots! Hey look! You didn't know it was a mirror shot, but it was a mirror shot! Hey look! Obvious foreshadowing! Oh my god, this guy's name is Joe Piano. Joe Piano, you guys! Is that not the most gangster movie name you have ever heard in your— Hey look, a surprisingly poignant and racially charged scene between the sniper and a black parking guard who was implied to have been in the war. Hey look, the most striking shot in the film right near the end when— Oh boy, I'm going to have a heck of a time keeping these videos under 15 minutes as we move forward. Oh. Okay, long story short. Eventually The Killing came out in theaters to basically no notice, no thanks to a lack of promotion by United Artists. Some critics picked up on it in Europe, but in America, Kubrick and Harris were still as under the radar as they'd ever been. Eventually, they would have to sell their 50% share in the film back to UA in order to secure more immediate funding, about which Harris would later remark, "And it's marvelous how quickly the film went into profit after UA owned all of it." Still, at least Harris Kubrick now had a relationship with UA, and this relationship is what would allow them to produce their next project, Paths of Glory, a film where we will witness Kubrick's newly matured style put to work on some truly heavy subject matter.